The administration works on preparing a budget for the following year almost the moment the board approves a new budget from the previous year. Mr. Galecko and the department chairs and facilitators, the assistant superintendents, the other central office administrators are always in the process of preparing the budget. At this time of the year, we present the board with a preliminary or a base budget. And that base budget is a snapshot of our first look. And some of our veteran board members will know that this is very early in the process. The board has many things to consider. The state has many things to consider. The federal stimulus package was just approved a day or two ago. That will have some implications on the budgeting process. So these are really preliminary information that we're giving to you. And not to be too concerned at how far out of balance we are at the very beginning of this process, because we do have a lot of work that needs to be done. Second slide. We focus on the mission of the district to provide the best education possible for each and every student. And we have a district strategic plan that guides our every work that we do with 4 goals. One about academic excellence, social and emotional well-being, critical competence, and inclusive, welcoming, and safe and secure school community. So we use those as our guiding principle as we prepare this budget. And I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to Mr. Galecko. And I would like to remind the community that on Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, there will be a presentation by Mr. Galecko, not quite Budget 101, because that presentation is currently housed and cataloged on the district's website. So if you'd like to look at how school budgeting 101, he really went through the basics. And then last year, he gave a little bit more detailed analysis. And on Wednesday evening, he'll give about an hour presentation that I would encourage our community to join. If you can't join it live, it'll be recorded and that video will be posted. So the rest of the presentation is Mr. Galecko's.
Thank you, Dr. Steinauer. Next
slide.
slide.
Could I just jump in? Should we ask questions as you move through it, Mr. Galecko, or should we ask questions at the end?
I think that would be appropriate, Mr. Beal. You can stop me on each slide and we'll go from there, so we're not missing anything. All right, next slide, Mr. Stengel. So we'll look at our 30,000-foot view here as far as where the money comes from. 77% of our money in this school district is generated locally, either by local taxes, or other local sources such as interest income or charges for services. We have a heavy reliance on local taxes. So when we choose not to increase taxes over the years, that has a lasting effect on the district. We also see monies come from a few other places, specifically state subsidies. Currently, we're looking at a PSERS reimbursement of over $9 million. That actually now exceeds our basic ed subsidy from the state of Pennsylvania. Along with that are special ed subsidies and other grants through the way. We also have a small reliance on federal funds, a little under $1.5 million of federal funds, and those are divvied out mostly by poverty factors. So that's where the money comes from. Next slide, Mr. Stengel.
Could I just jump in? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I know I've been pestering you about this for a while, Mr. Galecko, but the assessed valuation number for the, as seen under budgeted 21-22 of $2,773,000,000. Is that official yet, or is that still a guesstimate?
So that was our original disc in January. We'll get another one on April 1st that details the homestead. So we have some appeals going on right now. We'll hopefully that will increase by then.
Do you have any feel as to how close that the current?
I would say it's very close, Mr. Bill. It's always within about 1% as it was the year before.
So you anticipate it ticking up a bit then?
I would say yes, based on the home sales in the community, yes.
Thank you.
All right, to flip to our 30,000-foot view of expenditures, 79% of our budget goes towards paying our people. We're unusual. We're not like a manufacturer. We don't make widgets here. So the nature of our business is our people, and our people are our educators. So 79% of our expenditures go to salaries and benefits. The other big piece of that is our debt. 10% of our budget, it actually fell from last year. It used to be 11% with our bond refinancing, makes up our budget. So before we even turn a light on, we have 89% of our budget filled out by salaries, benefits, and our debt. You also see a couple other pie slices on there for our consumable supplies, and that includes our utilities and any of our classroom supplies or cleaning supplies. Our other category includes some repair and maintenance categories, and then our services, we pay a myriad of different ones to attorneys, auditors, consultants, insurance, transportation, tax collection, and crossing guards. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. This is our all-important student-centered budgeting model. Our student-centered budgeting model keeps academics at the core of our decision-making. When reductions are needed, we make sure they come as far away from the classroom as possible. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. Just like the theme of all of our board meetings this year, we are now starting to see and recognize the impacts of COVID on a local level. And as I talked about our reliance on local funds, that is certainly the issue going forward this year. So before we even got started, this board took the appropriate measure last year and had a 0 millage increase budget. So that put us starting our year off $2.77 million behind before we added any kind of expenditures. We have seen some COVID relief. There's a possible $1.6 million out there. I have them detailed below. ESSER 1, ESSER 2, a small special education mitigation grant, 2 PCCD grants, and then once all of those funds are exhausted, we'll be able to seek reimbursement for some of our FEMA eligible expenditures. Now, you know, though we receive these monies, they want you to spend them how they see fit. So we don't have that as a sort of a rescue piece in the budget, or we got $1.6 million to essentially cover salaries that were already here. Those expenditures went to Chromebooks and cleaning materials and professional services to catch up on some IEP evaluations that didn't quite happen during the pandemic. So those also present not an issue, but they're essentially captured over 3 fiscal years at this point. We've incurred expenditures in 1920, now 2021, and then going forward in 21-22, where we spent money and then we're receiving money, and it's going to lap about 3 fiscal years. So you won't see these huge increases all at once. They'll be kind of lapped over. And again, the story of the evening, which I will address in some upcoming slides, is our shortfalls in local revenue.
Mr. Gletko, could you enlighten us as to ESSER 2 and the, I guess that would be federal money, potentially federal or state money?
So everything you see down there below is federal money, actually. The PCCD grants actually were passed through federal funds. So ESSER 2 is an application process we're doing now, and currently we're seeking to do our technology refresh, which is part of our capital project plan. Every summer it's around $700,000. So we're going to hopefully use that for that once that gets approved, and then the remaining monies are going to be used for the remediation classes that Dr. Irvin, Dr. Davis, Dr. Steinauer talked about coming this summer. And
when do you think we will submit that application, and when do you hope it will be approved?
I think we'll submit it by the end of this month. It should be approved following that. Now that $832,000, I will tell you, if it's like any other federal fund, they'll give it to you in monthly payments over 12 months. And we should probably start receiving payments in June, and it'll probably continue through the whole next school year.
And we anticipate somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 of that being used for addressing the educational deficit in the form of after-school remediation or assistance and potentially summer programs?
Correct. That's where we're headed this moment, yes.
Thanks.
Can I also ask about, Dr. Steinhauer referenced the stimulus plan that just passed.
Sure.
And I think you had mentioned that that might be more money that could go towards operating costs.
Certainly.
Is there any more information about that?
So there's not much information out there about that yet. There's $170 billion allocated for schools nationally. They're saying 20% of that is going to be from remediation, and then the other 80% will kind of be able to be used as we see fit. So we won't know what those allocations are. I will tell you that in our last ESSER disbursements, they were dispersed on poverty need and Title I formulas. So I assume that'll be the same formula when that comes down.
Hey, Rob, how about in 2008, 2009?
Oh, so that's a good point, Dr. Steiner. So in the last recession in 2008, we got 2 payments in 2009 and 2010, and they were American Recovery Act dollars. We got $1 million in back-to-back years in those years to help offset salaries. So I assume that this will come down in that sort of fashion. I think we talked about that in the spring last year, that we're waiting for the federal government to act. And the federal government acting then puts the state more in balance, and I'll talk to that as we get further along, but the state has exhausted all of their reserves to fund us this year. So we're, again, only about 25% reliant on that, but it is a big piece of our budget.
There we go. One question is, in terms of COVID impact, do you have a quick ballpark estimate on what we spent over on things like PPE and cleaning supplies and, all of the additional materials? I mean, we've all talked about, the health and safety plan, and the district has gone above and beyond providing those layers of mitigation. Do we know what impact that has had since last spring when you started, trying to purchase as much Clorox 360 and Ultra boards?
Right. Correct, Dr. Stratmeyer. We, all of that money that we have spent so far is completely reimbursable.
It is reimbursed.
It is being reimbursable. And the problem is it's coming in over time, or we're having to spend other federal dollars before we apply for the next grant. So it's kind of lapping fiscal years. We are about $1.6 million into cleaning supplies, technology, PPE, any of the hand sanitizers you see throughout the district.
1.6 million.
1.6 million,
You
yes.
have shared that with us in the past, the sort of the running list.
The running list, that continues to grow. We've sequestered it in our chart of accounts where we have FEMA eligible expenditure accounts, these grants, because that'll all be part of the audit once we come through for our federal programs audits. All right, we can go to the next slide, Mr. Stengel. So our general budget issues for 21-22, these haven't changed over the years. Some of our stalwarts on the board have seen these for many years. But again, we were limited on the amount we could raise taxes. There were some small exceptions out there, but nothing worth sniffing at. The PSERS rate did only increase from 34.51 to 34.94. That's a small increase, but also salaries increase, so that number does look bigger than it, significantly bigger than it did last year. The state budget is a big issue. To me, it's more uncertain than ever, only because it shows about double the increase that we normally get of $233,000 in basic ed expenditures, and it relies heavily on charter school reform and a personal income tax increase, which I believe would be dead on arrival in our state legislature. So there's a lot to happen there. I could even foresee, hopefully not, a budget impasse, which we dealt with in 2016, where we didn't get any state money for about 6 months. So we're hoping that they iron that all out at the state level. Again, local revenue, I'm projecting some decreases. Our healthcare is up 5% this year. I'll address that in a different slide, but that's above our average. And again, we're making up for lost time there. And special education costs do continue to rise, by identified kids and just essentially salaries going up. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. Here's our early enrollment projection for next year. We're showing a 0.2% decrease for next school year. These figures are based off the cohort survival method, and we take in account Allegheny County and Mount Lebanon birth rates for the last years, and then take kindergarten age at 8.5 and kind of matriculate those children through the rolls there, and that's how we come up with our enrollment projection. I'll be honest, our enrollment has been steady at 5,300 for the better part of a decade, and I believe that probably even goes back about 30 years. So we're very pleased about that. Next slide, please. So as you recall from our pie chart, 79% of our budget goes to our people, and I will say that managing the employees, the amount of employees we have is our ultimate fiscal responsibility, and this is evidence of that. And our enrollment, has that slight downtick, and we adjust our staffing accordingly. The PCA figure on there, you see plus 0.64%. It's a result over the last 10 years of the creation of ABA classrooms over the last decade, an increase of identified students, and us having those PCAs in the buildings. It better serves our students, and it stops us from paying outside tuition for our most needy students. We handle them in-house where we feel it's most appropriate. Next slide, please. There we go. So our employee issues for next year, as right now, again, like Dr. Steinhauer said, this is business as usual. Our contractual salary increases for most of our staff, a lot of those driven through CBAs, just under 3%. The PSERS increase from 34.51 to 34.94. The healthcare increase of 5%. It was 3% last year. We're currently negotiating 2 CBAs, and this affects about 96 of our employees, 65 custodial and maintenance staff, and 31 food service workers. We do have notification of 11 teacher retirements. That includes some of us mid-year, so we'll work through all the staffing in regards to their replacement.
How does that level of retirements compare to other years?
So since I've been here, it's a banner year. We did 4 and then we did 3. So as a fiscal steward, I'm very pleased with 11 retirements because the difference between a top step teacher and our average hire of master's step 4 is significant.
Mr. Glecko, how many of those are mid-year? Do you know?
1 or 2. I think we got 2 in the fall and then the other 9 came. But we can get you that information in the packet this week. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. This is just for the board's edification here, and we'll call it the PSERS crisis, and it started in 2009, 2010, and that rate has gone from 4.78% to now just under 35%. So 35 cents on every dollar that leaves the district in payroll is sent to the PSERS pension. And I will mention that employees have always contributed their share, whatever their amount that they contribute, whether it be 7.5% or 9%, or if they choose to participate in the other options through PSERS, they always contribute their share through their paycheck. So next slide, Mr. Stengel. So to focus on PSERS some more, again, the 34.51 to 34.94. That's a 1.24% increase. So even without increasing anyone's salary, that's a 0.10 mil increase or $268,000. So you can see how that becomes significant. Tomorrow night, I'll dive into that into some detail and show you how that shakes out with the salary increases as well. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. Healthcare costs. Again, healthcare costs going up 5% this year. They backed the rate off last year from 3.5 to 3, and that helped people out during a COVID year. But now they're back trying to increase their fund balance, and their reason for doing that, the consortium said, is they like to keep at least 3 months of reserves to pay claims in their fund balance. So that increase of 5% equates to $470,000 or 0.1749 mils. And the average increase since 2010 has been 3.35%. So we've seen national increases anywhere from 10 to 15%. So our participation in the consortium is very beneficial to this district. And I will say that all of our employee groups have a premium share that are collectively bargaining, and it's anywhere from 10.5 to 11.5%. And those exist in all of our CBAs. So our employees are contributing a fair share. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. So in a normal year, this is a slide where I tell you that everything's coming in over budget. I unfortunately do not have that same thing to report this year. Our earned income taxes kind of boomerang every month. One month they look great, one month they're lagging behind. Currently, I have us projected at $134,000 short of our budgeted figure. Our realty transfer taxes are trending near the budgeted amounts, but we had a huge property sale, a storage facility over the hill sale, and that's kind of skewing those numbers at this time. I think the big story of our local income impact is interest income. We lost $1 million of revenue in interest income, and that is a result of the economy tanking essentially over the last year. So last year we were earning anywhere from 1.33 to 1.529% on our CDs that we send out for the year. This year we're currently getting 0.01% or 0.121% on long-term investments. So we lost 99.25% of our interest income revenue, and that is contributing to our shortfall here today.
Mr. Good. Oh, go ahead. You're probably going to ask the question, what can we invest in?
No, I know our investment options are very limited.
Yes, right.
Yes.
To short-term government securities or something like that.
To basically CDs, and we're very conservative. We're restricted by school code and don't invest anything where we'd lose any principal.
And this is investment income on our fund balances, our total fund balances.
Oh, it's our total deposits for the year would exceed $100 million. So throughout the year, as we get real estate taxes in, $65 million in the fall, we get our every other month payment of basic ed subsidy. They go into an account. We invest them so they come due as the cash flow needs come throughout the year. We send them out for 30, 60, 90, 120 days to meet our cash flow needs, to maximize our interest income. And at this point, there's just nothing out there to be had.
So you're saying that we buy 3 or 6 month CDs?
Correct.
On that money as it flows in from local and state sources?
Correct. And you'll see that in the monthly treasurer's report on the last page. We have a breakdown there, so you can see how those are invested.
Mr. Gluck, oh, sorry. Is it fair to say that the savings that the bond refinance sort of netted us are kind of going to be a wash in the next year? With
close to a wash. So our payment was due to go up $500,000. So it was going to go up $500,000. We refinanced the bond that saved us $800,000. So really our debt service payment is a $300,000 reduction next year. So it is contributing. It actually is a $560,000 reduction this year. So it is helping offset at least half of that hit we're taking this year. A couple other categories on here. We have not a lot of tuition from our international students. We get anywhere from 3 to 7 of those every year at $20,000 a kid. We do a lot of tuition through our adult education program, specifically driver's education, and that has been fluctuating as we go through. We have not charged any gate revenue for any of our athletic events. That can be anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 a year. And I've updated the board, I think, a couple times during my treasurer's report, but our charter school numbers have been steady at 37. And if it stays that way through the end of school, we'll exceed our budget by $228,000 for those 37 children. So next slide, Mr. Stengel. So before we talk about the difference in revenues and expenditures, I wanted to make the board aware of this, specifically detail where the kind of the problems of the pandemic have finally caught up with our local revenue streams and our ability to balance the budget. These projections coincide with the close of books in January and take into account where we have collected percentage-wise over the last 5 years. So just in those categories, I don't have a tax increase factored in at the top there. That would be the real estate number today with our assessed value. So we're taking a hit in earned income taxes. We're taking a slight hit in some of the other taxes that I discussed. The interest income being the big one that stands out there. or other income specifically to tuition and other charges for services are coming under. For a total shortfall in local revenue, we're projecting for 21-22 of $1.8 million. So you couple the $1.8 million shortfall in local and the 2.8 essentially that we started the year off. So we're $4.6 million behind before we even added any expenditures. So this is kind of to help the board understand. Tomorrow night I'll go into this in detail and show you how we're taking no increases from the state at this point besides their standard PSERS and Social Security reimbursement. You know, they have a bunch of different revenue streams that they could give us, but I'm just not confident yet that those are going to come through. So next slide, Mr. Stengel. So like I explained, you know, we essentially started the year $4.6 million behind. You know, that revenue number is about $1.4 million less than it was the year before. And you couple that with our expenditures, again, we have only increased salaries and benefits of the staff that we currently have working here. And that's what the out of balance would be, just over $7 million, $7.1 million. To equate that to millage, 2.6951 mils, that's completely unattainable. Based on the Act 1 index, our index cap is at 0.8675 mils, which equates to about $2.3 million. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to present the board with a scenario if they were to choose to raise taxes to the Act 1 index, that 0.87675 I had on the previous slide. That would bring our out of balance to about $4.8 million. Normally around this time of year, we're working with about a $4 million deficit before we refine any of our expenditures and see final predictions on our revenue. So this is kind of the reality of what the pandemic has done to our local revenues, and the uncertainties from the state and federal government are making it very difficult to balance a budget in our current situation.
Mr. Glecko, that potential tax increase at the index of the 8,675 mils, what does that equate to for the average family on a per $100,000 basis?
So that would be $86.75 for every $100,000 in value. So about $270 a year on a $300,000 house in Mount Lebanon. You divide that by 12 payments, $25 a month. When you look at it that way, let's be sure on the math. $22.50 a month.
Thank
you. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. So these are our historical millage increases dating back to 9-10. Of course, we had the outlier year of 10-11 where we issued the high school bond, and the reassessment year that we don't address in the calculation that was revenue neutral. We had to drop our assessment, our tax rate, so it was the same as the year before based on the new assessment. So 0.46 is our 12-year average, or a 1.91%. So I wanted to show the board this, that the board has raised taxes 8 of the last 11 years. And if we use the 0.46 average with the, say, last year and this year, we'd be at 0.92. So we're very close to that 0.8675 millage rate maximum. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. So a lot of moving parts still happening. We need to go through district-wide teacher staffing needs. We need to look at all our PDE guidelines and ratios for nurses and special education teachers. Again, the state budget asked by the governor is a lot. I expect the budget will change significantly. It will also be impacted significantly by this third stimulus, this American Recovery Act. Again, like I said to Ms. Fleischer earlier, not much update so far, but there's $170 billion out there for schools, and 20% of that money set aside for remediation. And then the rest of it, hopefully we can use to offset some of these shortfalls. Next slide, Mr. Stengel. So the next steps, if we do not want to consider a tax increase, we're working from a $7.1 million deficit with a tax increase at 4.8. We will continue to work with our 40 department heads who have budget responsibility to reduce and refine our expenditures, finalize our staffing. We'll get another 2 to 3 months of projections in our local revenue to hopefully get some good news there. We will also need to consider a use of fund balance. I talked about this on my presentation last spring, that essentially the way for us to climb out of this is to incrementally have tax increases up and then use fund balance to tail off until we achieve structural balance with the tax increase and our expenditures.
Can I jump in there, Mr. Glecko?
Sure.
In relation to the fund balance, there was something in our packet showing fund balance history.
Mm-hmm.
In that last bar on the bar graph reflects a fund balance for 2021.
Correct.
Is that for the end of this budget year?
That would be if we use the total budgeted amount of 2,775. That's what our fund balance would look like at June 30th, 2021.
Are we anticipating doing so? I mean, how does,
Currently, my projections show us spending about $500,000 less than that. So we'd be at like $2.2 million. But again, that's with the close of business of January. So we'll continue to watch those expenditures.
So potentially that number of $8,262,000 could be $500,000 higher potentially. Correct. I understand it's just a projection.
Just a projected figure, you are correct.
And does that include all 3 or 4 categories?
That's all categories added together, yes, Mr. Beal.
From our capital fund to our general fund to our unassigned fund balance?
Correct.
And we anticipate an unassigned fund balance of 6%?
Correct. So 6% of that would be about $6.6 million, and then the rest of it would be able to be allocated to either capital projects or OPEB or any other categories we see fit.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just remind the board and the public that that is historically a low number.
Correct. We haven't been at those levels probably since 09 or 10. It's been at least 10 years since we've seen a fund balance below 11 million, 10 million.
And if you exclude money that's sitting in the unassigned fund balance of, you said 6.6?
Correct.
And money that we need to set aside for immediate or for next year's capital expenditures, our capacity to use general fund balances to offset a potential tax increase is quite limited.
Agreed.
Thank you.
And can I ask another fund balance question?
Sure, Ms.
So
Fletcher.
I recall last year, in order to use 2.775 million of fund balance, we did a temporary 1-year resolution to lower the unassigned fund balance from 6 to 5%.
Correct.
So I'm assuming any recommendation for this year use of fund balance would have us back at that 6% level. And I seem to recall that we also used funds from OPEB. And would we be looking to replenish those funds?
So our OPEB funds currently, that used to read about $2.6 million. With the use of that fund balance and the rebalancing of our fund balance, we've only kept 1 year worth of OPEB in our fund balance, and that's $460,000.
So would we be looking to replenish that to the previous levels?
I don't think we'll be at that point, Ms. Fleischer. I think the more important point would be to replenish any of the capital needs we would do. I think that's our most important ask every year for the board. And typically between Mr. Marciniak's projects and our technology refresh, that's anywhere from $1.4 to $1.5 million a year.
And how much do?
Sorry, I was just continuing on that same line with the capital projects budget, which we actually passed last month.
Correct.
And it was at a lower level than typical for Mr. Marciniak. It was just shy of $500,000, if I'm remembering correctly.
Correct.
Is that correct? My question regarding the rest of that in a typical year is purchasing of textbooks or purchasing of new technology to replace outdated. I know we did a big purchase several times in the past COVID year for technology to be able to provide students with technology at home, would we still have that same push to buy more technology since we bought more than normal
So
last year?
we did purchase a significant amount of technology with our current grants that we received, and we're working through that budget right now, but again, these devices only last 4 years, so you need to replace them, so we're still looking at a $725,000 replacement schedule. But as I mentioned, when you see that ESSER 2 at $832,000, we're earmarking that towards our technology refresh. So that will not impact the capital fund this year. Additionally, in this budget is a capital reserve transfer of $200,000. We'll discuss that when we get closer to the budget vote, but we still have $300,000 in safety and security money left that was earmarked in our capital projects fund. We're working through now to reconcile everything from that safety and security $1 million allocation. That was actually helped by previous PCCD grants. So once we determined everything on our checklist, which I believe we're about 99.9% complete on that, we would ask the board to reallocate that for this year's current capital projects, and then the transfer would be built into this budget to cover that. So we would actually have no offset, no cash, besides the $200,000 outlay for capital this year.
So,
Thank you.
anybody else feel like I'm?
This is our discussion. It is.
Let's say the underspend is the anticipated $500,000, and that gets us to 8.8. If we back out a 6% unassigned fund balance of 6.6, and what must be in the capital fund to finance capital expenditures for next year, as Mrs. Olbert referred to, about 400,000. I mean, what is in the general fund? What do we anticipate being in the general fund?
So at this point, if you ask me what the fund balance would look like at year end, it would be 6.6 to unassigned, 460 to OPEBs. That brings us to 700,000, and then the difference of that, $1.5 to $2 million
to OPEB or capital?
to capital. So the biggest amount going to capital.
So we have about
basically one more year of reserves to address our capital needs.
Okay, but so we have in our general fund, and I know these are projections and loose numbers, but somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million in our general fund available to offset a potential tax increase.
Correct. Closer to 2 million, yes.
Thanks.
So that's a good point, Mr. Beal, and that's kind of the yin and the yang of this process. We talk about reductions and we talk about revenue increases. Unfortunately, on the revenue side, the only thing they have control over is the actual real estate tax increase and the charges of services for use of our building. So the two things that you guys can control, the rest is up to the state and the federal government. And then it's our job to refine those expenditures to create the balance. So we can flip to the next slide, Mr.
Before
Stein.
you do, and since you just said that, this is more for Dr. Steinhauer. A programmatic reduction is always on the list, and we always hope we don't have to do that. But I'm actually wondering if you are considering any additional programs and the funding for them, because we have been talking about recovery and doing some summer programs and whatever remediations we may need in the fall. So are you budgeting for additional program work or?
Last one.
We supplied the board with some information about increases, and these were just a few that we heard the board discuss publicly, and we'll hold off on talking about them publicly until the next meeting. But we do believe that our remediation or summer program or after-school programs will be able to be funded through the ESSER 2 grants. So we don't believe there's any additional money for next year that needs to be set aside for any type of remediation or recovery.
Thank you.
But isn't that only, assuming we're going to spend a significant portion of that, as I recall, on technology, is that correct? We anticipate getting what was it, 800 some thousand?
832, so a little over 100,000 in remediation for the summer.
So for technology, we're thinking what, Rob?
700,000.
700,000.
And then the remaining going to remediation.
I know this is a tough budget year, guys, but that number is inadequate, in my opinion. We need to look to fund very significant remediation efforts, and $130,000 won't cut it.
So we're hopeful again with this next stimulus package, Mr. Beal, like with 20% of the 170 billion dedicated to remediation, that will help offset some of those costs as well. So as soon as they sign that into law, we'll have that breakdown.
I also think it's premature to talk about what sort of money we need before the administration figures out what sort of programs we need. We should not put the cart before the horse. I mean, there's testing, the map testing, things that need to be done to determine, correct, what you will do this summer and then figure out what the cost is. I don't think we figure the cost out first.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. I think there's one after that. Again, so we're going to keep with our timeline here and continue to refine. I'm going to come to you even next Monday night, and we just closed February this week, and I'll have some better projections on revenue for you and come back to the table in that regard. Again, determine and review our staffing potential allocations and reductions. Consider any board priorities that are out there. Consider a use of fund balance, which I believe we will have to use going forward. Again, tomorrow or Wednesday this week, I will have about an hour presentation about the budget. I slice it and dice it every way, and hopefully it's easily understood by the community. And we will look for a proposed final budget in April and then a final budget in May. So I will talk to you at least 5 or 6 more times about this before we get to a budget vote in May.
And the last slide just shows the community is always looking for, and the board is looking for, a return on investment. We continue to excel in our rankings, in our performance, and we want to make sure that we continue to offer the finest academic and extracurricular programs that the community can afford. So thank you, Rob.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you Wednesday night and back next Monday.
Too bad.